does in the Clippers. We'll be getting into that more detail and the craziness of the NBA a little bit later on in the show. We'll talk with us a little bit about the course, the streets of Toronto. This is through the streets of Toronto, which is a little bit different than a road course or obviously an oval course. But talk with us a little bit about the course there in Toronto.
Well, it's an 11-turn track, and the one thing that all of the drivers seem to agree on, and there's not a lot of things that drivers tend to agree on, but the one thing they do always is turns 9, 10, and 11 are the big trouble spots. And this year we have an epoxy set up in turn 11 to make it a little bit more stickier, but it's also giving the drivers more issues. We've seen a lot of drivers have trouble early in practice already. Alexander Rossi has had his fair share of troubles pretty early on, and he's not the only one. Marcus Ericsson crashing yesterday. That, I believe, actually happened in turn 7. But a lot of drivers struggling, and it's not just IndyCar drivers. They're struggling in all the series. USF 2000, there was a big accident in qualifying yesterday. The NASCAR Pinty Series drivers, they've been struggling with it. So it's definitely a trouble spot, and that's one that most of the drivers will be looking towards to try to manage their tires, manage issues.
Well, absolutely, and that's it's a little bit different here on my ears, between my ears, and I'm having a delay, so I do apologize. I think we're getting this fixed. We're just trying to hobble through to the next commercial break. But obviously, Scott Dixon, Simon Patajon, James Hinchcliffe, all ones to watch there in Toronto. Let's talk a little bit about one of your fellow Canadians, and that's Robert Wickens. Robert Wickens, through the help of Arrow and Sam Schmidt, was able to take a lap in a car yesterday.
Yeah, Robert Wickens, really an incredible story there. And so he'll be driving the Acura NSX pace car before the race tomorrow, taking a couple laps. He's got a little bit of on-track practice already in the streets of Toronto, and then he also did a test session with that car at Canadian Tire Motorsport Park, just about an hour up the road in Bowmanville. So it's really cool to see him get to drive this car. It's a car equipped with hand controls, and this is something that Arrow and Honda have been able to develop over the years. And they actually developed one, if you guys remember, for Sam Schmidt a few years back, which is more than just hand controls. It's he uses his mouth basically to drive, and it's really incredible to see the way that Arrow is able to grow this technology. And Robert and Honda and Arrow, they all held a press conference yesterday, which was fun to be a part of. I got to ask Robert about the fan support he's received here in Toronto. And, if you're in Toronto this week, you would see more Robert Wickens hats and T-shirts than you would see James Hinchcliffe. And that's something I would not have predicted a year ago, that anyone would be more popular than Hinch at this racetrack. But people really do love seeing Robert around, and it's been fun to watch all that through the press conference yesterday. He talked about his rehab. He talked about getting back to where he needs to be, and you could see there was just a smile on his face most of the time. He's taking this all in stride as much as he can, and it's been great to see Robert really be open with his recovery.
It is, and what a horrifying wreck it was, and certainly he's lucky to be alive, and certainly his teammate James Hinchcliffe knows what it's like to go through this type of extreme rehab. He was able to come back as well. So hopefully in the future we'll be able to see Wickens in a car again. Well, now that we're talking about Arrow, we might as well start with Sam Schmidt and James Hinchcliffe. Obviously, the mayor of Hinchtown, the other favorite Canadian in IndyCar, it seems, has moved into second place. But James Hinchcliffe, one of my personal favorites. What are we seeing from him this weekend?
Well, I mean, they've had a little bit of trouble getting up to speed, but they're kind of finding their way there now. And I think this is kind of the story every year. Hinch doesn't tend to find a lot of speed in practice, and then it gets into the race, and whether it be through strategy or finding that pace in the race, they do find it, and they get up to the front. A couple seasons getting podium finishes. Obviously Wickens got a podium last year, and then I believe Hinch was 4th or 5th. So, I mean, he's going to probably find that speed, get up there, and this is a really important race for him. He wants to win this race, I think, probably more so than he would want to win the Indy 500. Win in front of your home crowd. It's it's a big deal, especially when you're the only hometown driver in the field. So I think this is a really important weekend for James Hinchcliffe. He's got a good teammate to lean on in Marcus Ericsson, though he has struggled a bit this weekend getting involved in an accident. But I think the Schmidt-Peterson boys, they've got some good speed. Honda has quite a bit of speed this weekend, so it should be a good weekend for James Hinchcliffe, I think. I don't know if it's going to be a win, but I think a podium is definitely in the realm of possibility.
Well, I certainly hope so. So let's talk a little bit about some of the stables that are in Toronto. Let's start with the biggest of them all, and that's Team Penske. There's some rumblings that are going around that there might be a possibility that Rossi will jump ship at the end of this season. I think he's found a home there with Andretti. I don't really anticipate that happening. But Roger Penske, what are we seeing out of there? Obviously, we've got Will Power, Simon Pettijohn, Joseph Newgarden, and all the Penske stable.
Well, the thing that I see with this is, and I've heard those rumblings actually quite a bit yesterday as well, that maybe Rossi is going to be making his way over to Team Penske, but I just don't see where there's room unless they want to add a new car and find the sponsorship for it, which I just don't think they would be able to do right now. Excuse me. I mean, how do you dump Simon Pagenaud, your Indy 500 winner, who basically dominated the month of May? He's not quite, on a full season pace right now, but it's just, I don't know how you dump an Indy 500 winner right after he wins it. Joseph Newgarden also having an extremely strong season. He's won a few races this year. And oddly enough, Will Power has kind of been the weakest link of the Team Penske bunch, but that doesn't mean you get rid of him. I mean, this has kind of been a bit of an off year for him, but you don't really – I feel like if you lose Will Power, that would be an asinine decision. So unless Team Penske intends to open a fourth car again on a full-time basis, which I think if that were the case, Elio wouldn't have gone away. I don't see Alexander Rossi jumping ship over to Team Penske. And kind of as you said, I think he's found a good home with the Andretti Autosport boys. So right now I'm thinking, as you can probably hear cars behind me, right now I'm thinking Rossi's going to stay put.
Talk a little bit about Andretti. What do we see? Okay, we'll go ahead and talk about Rossi there in Toronto, and I totally agree with you. I think that Alexander Rossi has found a good spot there with Andretti, but what are we seeing there with the Andretti camp?
Well, Rossi's definitely leading the way in terms of all of those drivers. Zach Beach, this was a really good race for him last year, and I think he needs to turn it around this year and try to find that same speed that he had. He went from the back. He started, I think, in one of the two last rows, and then ended up making it up to sixth or seventh in the race. So I think Beach needs to find that speed to get where he needs to be. Marco Andretti has also had pretty impressive pace at the Honda Indy in the past. I'm not quite sure if they're going to be there this weekend. So, I mean, I think Andretti is kind of not where they need to be right now, aside from Alexander Rossi, and that shouldn't really be a surprise either.
Well, let's okay, now I'm getting feedback.
I can hear you on my end.
Okay, we're gonna keep hobbling through this, Tyson. I appreciate your patience with us on this. So because I'm multitasking here, I'm kind of lost my notes, my place in the notes. So, but go ahead and just walk us through tomorrow's race. What are we looking for? What are the dark horses? What are we looking for from qualification? And what are some of the strategies that these teams will be putting together as far as fuel mileage, tires, everything that counts in putting together a street course race?
Well, I think one of the key things right now is we look back at yesterday's practice sessions, and again, like I was saying before, 9, 10, 11, those are going to be the trouble spots for people today. And if you can get through 9, 10, 11 relatively smoothly, which, I say relatively because it's kind of hard to get through a street course like Toronto smoothly. Sorry, got cars behind me that were really interrupting me there. But if you can get through 9, 10, 11 smoothly in qualifying, you can probably put up a pretty good lap. Simon Pagenaud and Scott Dixon were the two quickest in the practice sessions yesterday. And I think somebody that you really have to watch for is Felix Rosenqvist. I think I say this a lot, but particularly on these street courses is where he's been putting up his best results. Obviously the debut at St. Pete was pretty spectacular. It seemed like, he was maybe going to pull a Wickens and almost win on debut. He was really strong in Detroit as well. Those are his two best finishes in IndyCar in the two street courses there. And he's been pretty quick in practice as well. I believe he was second quick in the second practice yesterday. So I think, and he's got a veteran teammate to lean on in Scott Dixon, who has won here several times and is the defending winner of this race. So I think Dixon, Pagenaud, Rosenqvist, the guys that were fast yesterday, those are going to be the guys you want to keep your eye on today and throughout the rest of the weekend.
Well, certainly we got our top five: Simon Pagenaud, Felix Rosenqvist, Sebastian Bourdais, Mr. Piggott, Scott Dixon, Graham Rahal, Marco Andretti, and Joseph Newgarden, Ryan Hunter-Reay, and Will Power all round out the top 10. What do we say about what's going on in the top 10 in point standings?
Well, I think the top 10 is kind of what you would expect to be. You have those drivers up at the front that we would expect, and I think right now it's kind of a fight between Alexander Rossi and Joseph Newgarden for the title. I really don't see Simon Pagenaud sticking it out through the remainder of the season. Every time we look at this race in Toronto, it's kind of the pivotal moment, the turning point in championship, just because of where it rests in the season, kind of right at the halfway mark. So I think we look forward and we see that these guys in Rossi and Newgarden, these are going to be the two fighting it out for the championship, which really could make things interesting if, we do see that story of Rossi moving to Team Penske next season. But again, I just don't see that happening.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Penske is Penske. It is kind of hard to say no to Roger Penske, but I certainly agree. I do not see Rossi making that move. But, if anybody can make it happen, it's Roger Penske, because he has the money to make it happen, and he's got the payroll to make it happen, and he's got the history in the championships to make it happen. The other sports, Penske is certainly the super team as well. You talked a little bit about Chip Ganassi Racing as far as those goes, but, it's good to see young rookie Simon did well here in Indy. He's doing well. He's third in the point standing, so he's obviously learning a lot from Chip Ganassi. And what are your thoughts about him?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch who the driver was.
Rosenqvist.
Okay, yeah, no, I think he's a really talented driver. We've seen, and I think a lot of people saw that just in his past. He's done a lot of racing in Europe, competed part-time in Indy Lights a few years ago, where he actually does have a little bit of experience at this racetrack. And he really tends well on the street courses. I think he needs to, kind of learn these ovals before we consider him a, more well-rounded championship contender. But Felix Rosenqvist, he's a really talented driver. I think, when you look at the rookie classes here, we have a really solid rookie class. Obviously, Colton Hurd has got a win already. Kind of struggled since winning, but, when you win in your rookie season, I think you can deem that a success no matter what. And then Marcus Ericsson has also had a really strong start to the season, getting a podium earlier this year. So the rookies that we have right now in the IndyCar Series, extremely talented. They come from very diverse backgrounds. Ericsson and Rosenqvist, actually both Swedish, both raced a lot in Europe, and Ericsson, past F1 experience. I think we have a really good rookie class in those three.
How hard is it to pass How hard is it to pass at Toronto?
It's extremely hard to pass, and you have to really manage your tires and manage the other drivers around you to see where a good passing opportunity is. I think a lot of drivers, they often, in turn 7, we kind of have a bit of a hairpin, I guess you could say, and a lot of drivers, I feel like, get tempted to make the passes there, and they end up getting bit by it, and that's an area that you really don't want to make a mistake. Your best opportunities to make a pass are when you get on the push to pass, get close enough to another driver that you can open that up and use that advantage on the straightaways to try to make a pass. And then also when other drivers make mistakes, I think most of the passes that we see or most of the position